but it's still on the Wayback Machine, but I don't tell anybody the URL because it's way too embarrassing.
Hi, my name is Craig Loewen. I am a program manager for the Windows Subsystem for Linux on the Windows for Developers team at Microsoft. So my goal is to make developing on Windows awesome, especially for your Linux workflows. And I am joined today by our special guest, Sarah.
Hi, my name is Sarah Tamsin, and I'm a web designer from South Wales, and I help support small and local businesses improve their online presence by making their websites amazing. And I also create a lot of educational content around technology because I want to improve people's digital skills. I don't just want to be there to do tasks for them. I actually want people to be able to do these sort of things themselves.
Sarah, you told us a little bit about what you do, but could you expand on what you do professionally? What kind of tools do you use, and how do you like to do your development?
So I mostly create websites for small businesses and then also educate small businesses on how they can manage and maintain their websites and their wider online presence so that they can actually grow and that they can reach wider audiences and reach more people and essentially grow their businesses and make more money. I am a front-end web developer, so for the last 15 or 20 years, I've been working primarily with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
Do you develop and make your content both on Windows and the same PC, or do you use different environments and devices?
For the first year I was doing it, I was basically just like using a Raspberry Pi with an SSD plugged in. And like I'll be honest, at the time I didn't even know that like WSL existed. I found out about WSL about 18 months later. So when I did find it, it was like a bit of a revelation. And then I think about some admin tasks that I have to do involving commands like wget or curl, and I couldn't do them in a Windows environment without having to install additional software. So I'd always turn to Linux for that. I dabbled in the past with using virtual machines and stuff, so I think having WSL in the operating system is brilliant. Craig, could you tell me more about your role at Microsoft and what your day-to-day tasks are?
Yeah, so I am a program manager at Microsoft, and what that really means is it sounds like I manage a lot of people or something like that, but really what it is trying to define the goals and next steps for a specific product or program. And so I primarily focus on the Windows Subsystem for Linux, and my day-to-day is usually looking at what should we do next, right? What features should we prioritize? What bugs should we prioritize? When should we do them by? And then convincing the team. So if I have an opinion, it's making sure that it's well informed and talking to all the relevant stakeholders. So like the development team, other teams that we work with, and making sure that everyone is on the same page of, hey, we should go ahead and do these features, or perhaps we should invest in this aspect of WSL, and then solving the problems that come up with it. So looking at general architecture, making sure that it's funded with the right amount of devs to be done by the right time, and then making sure that it lands with customers. So it's really just a long-winded to say that I'm helping the product, right? Everything is product focused of how can we best make this product to best suit customer needs. So Sarah, how did you learn to code? Like what tools did you learn? What did you start with?
Okay, so I first started to learn to code was with like how most people start was with HTML, the kind of the basic markup of the entire internet, right? But I learned this way back in around about the year 2000. And I was very young at the time. I was barely 12 years old. So a friend of mine who was a few years older than me taught me some basic HTML. And I really wanted my own website online. And I mean, at the time, social media didn't exist. Blogging platforms didn't exist. If I wanted a website, I had to get one hosted and create it myself. So that same friend gave me a subdomain of his domain name and allowed me to like have my own website. And this was way back in the year 2000, and we used hosting with cPanel on it. And I created my HTML files in Notepad and I uploaded them using FTP. And I mean, I had like a single page website, it was just index.html. Everything was in one file. And it was very, very basic. But it's still on the Wayback Machine, but I don't tell anybody the URL because it's way too embarrassing. I didn't do any professional website work or professional web development for about 10 years. I just worked, I was in the industry, working in a voluntary organisation. And it turned out that one of my roles was to update their website, and their content editing system didn't have any what you see is what you get options at all. Nobody in the organisation knew how to do HTML and CSS, so I started making the website look a lot better, and then they started to create some extra sort of tasks for me around that. So it was all really self-learning and right-clicking on websites and inspecting things and seeing how things was done. And that's kind of the way that I taught myself, I guess, over the last 15 to 20 years, is just by learning to do things as I need to do them. So Craig, what is your favourite part about working for Microsoft and in particular the WSL team?
That's a good question. I think that probably my favorite part is the amount of impact that I get to have with customers. Is really, really fun. WSL is used by a lot of people for a lot of really different things. People use it for really intense, different workflows. For example, on Twitter, I've seen people, run a VM inside of a VM inside of a VM in WSL running like Windows 98. And I'm like, this is fantastic that people will even do this with something that I help contribute to. So that's probably my favorite, is having those moments of someone's like, wow, I love this tool and I love doing this crazy, wacky thing with it, is probably my favorite moments working on WSL. So Sarah, you use WSL, and we talked a little bit about how you've enjoyed moving from Linux to Windows with it. Are there any other facets about it or features in it that you really like using for your day-to-day work?
Actually, yes, something which I have already mentioned is scraping websites, and I don't mean in a bad way. I mean, for example, like when a client is migrating from one CMS to another, and it's usually sometimes a lot easier just to scrape some of the images and content off the front end of the website. So I'd always turn to WSL to do that, to use curl and wget, and I've got a file of commands that I use on a regular basis, so I can just quickly refer to them. Craig, you create quite a lot of educational material. What is it that you like about teaching people, and how do you stay on top of new trends and information?
Fantastic question. I like teaching people because I think it's fun to show people new ways to do stuff. And my kind of content that I always try to make is really actionable of, hey, if you wanted to get started, like, do this. And here's a way that you can do something with something. Like a good example is, one of my favorite videos that I made was how to use Linux GUI apps with WSL. And in one of the demos of those videos, I played the guitar and stuff to show how to record audio with GUI apps in WSL. And I think it's fun to think of interesting use cases that make people go like, oh, wow, that's interesting. I want to be able to do that. And inspiring that spark in people to want to go do something and want to go create something. It's very rewarding for me. Sarah, do you have any advice for people wanting to switch lanes in their careers? And what specific advice would you give them, as well to someone who would want to be starting out?
For somebody who is an absolute complete beginner, I would say that the best way to learn is to learn by doing. You've really got to just get started and do some of the processes which are scary to you, which is exactly how I started. Like when I was first running my WordPress website and I needed to write a SQL query, I was so scared. I checked it, like triple checked it, double checked it again, took several backups before I'd run it. And it was like, if I just didn't take that step, then I'd have never known how to do tasks like that. So I would say to people, like, get started as soon as possible. Don't hold back just because something feels like it's too technical. Like, the only way you're going to learn is by actually doing it yourself. That's the best advice that I can give to people, is to just start trying things, because that's how you will learn. And what is your favorite feature in Windows 11?
Oh, okay. Well, I will give first the answer of one that I didn't work on, to not be biased, but my favorite feature is the snapping in Windows 11. So if you hover over the top right of a window, you can get like a grid and get better snapping options. So you can do things like, I have a very large monitor, so being able to snap like one big window in the middle and two small ones on the sides has been awesome. It's been really fantastic. And then that's the non-biased answer, and I'll give you the biased answer now, which is it's a feature that I worked on, and that's been Linux GUI app support inside of Windows 11 is probably my favorite, just because it's very magical to me to be able to open a Linux app and it runs, you see it on your Windows taskbar and it runs just like any other app on Windows. I think is magical. I think is the only way that I felt when I first started running it. What do you like most about web development on Windows?
Well, I suppose that the fact that you've got the option to use WSL, the fact that you've got the option to use Linux and Windows at the same time, actually I think the fact that VS Code has that kind of native support for both, and I think you can have VS Code open in WSL as like a server, so you could be working on literally working on a cross-platform file. And I think that the fact that you've got the option to do that is fantastic.
Who are 3 people in the industry that you look up to, or anyone that you look up to for tech?
I'm going to go with 3 other female tech content creators. Firstly, I will go with Ania Kubrov. She's on YouTube, and I'm so sorry if I've pronounced the name incorrectly, but she creates some really fun coding tutorials specifically around JavaScript. Things where you can create video games within your browser, and anybody of any age can follow along with these tutorials. And I really love her presentation style just because it's so accessible and it makes coding accessible to loads more people. Another influencer, her name is Arij Abu Ali, and she has created a huge community of women who work in technical SEO. This community's got hundreds of women. There's a huge Slack community, a huge LinkedIn community, and on Facebook as well. And the way that she engages with the community is fantastic. The community is so well engaged, and there's always so much different stuff going on. And then finally, Marie Haynes, who creates a technical SEO podcast. It's more of a general SEO podcast, actually, but she's so knowledgeable, and the way that she shares and presents her knowledge on her podcast every week, I really look up to that, and I'd love to have my own podcast one day.
So thanks so much for joining me today, Sarah. It was really, really fun talking to you.
Thank you so much, Craig, and thank you very much for having me on this discussion. I've really enjoyed it.